So I'm sure that I don't need to relay the news to everyone again since this has completely blown up on social media, but Game Freak has announced the Pokemon Home can only transfer Pokemon to Sword and Shield if they appear in the Galar Regional Pokédex. I think it's time we talked about this and calmly come to an understanding of why this choice exists in the first place, and why myself and many others believe it to honestly be a really poor one. The script for this video was originally a lot angrier. It's been rewritten twice already in the past few days, but I think I've finally managed to dissect exactly why all of these Pokemon have been cut. That being said, Pokemon is the series that I personally hold very close to my heart. I began in 2009 when I first played Pokemon Pearl, capping off my adventure with my level 87 Empoleon, 46 Golem, and level 52 Palkia. Even if I don't remember the exact levels, those three Pokemon have memories associated with them pretty naturally, just as many others do. When Empoleon comes to mind, I think of my own Empoleon that was super high level because I didn't know how to switch the first Pokemon of my party because I was a stupid kid, or when I did my first trade with my childhood friend to evolve my Graveler, or better yet, when I first heard that amazing legendary encounter music before throwing my Master Ball at Palkia like a complete idiot. They're just bits of code with some nice sprite work over them, but I always looked forward to seeing how those memories looked when animated in sprite form in black and white, or how they'd unfortunately turn out in 3D when I transferred them further to Pokemon X and Y. With the Switch and Sword and Shield, I could not wait to see these exact Pokemon I literally grew up with on the big screen, which just doesn't seem plausible anymore. You could argue that this is entirely a nostalgia-based thing, and that's kind of the point, but it's also one based off of expectation. For as much as Game Freak loves to add features and mechanics and remove features and mechanics to give every game a little bit of unique flair, Pokemon has always been an iterative series that constantly expanded upon adding Pokemon to a roster. Sure, not every Pokemon was catchable in each game, but ever since Generation 3, that aspect of the series has continuously built upon itself, even if it took a couple of extra months to do so in some cases. In fact, part of the reason for the drop-off in players between Gold, Silver, and Crystal to Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald was due to the fact that people could not carry their creatures over due to limitations. We know for a fact that this was a limitation because the code for Pokemon was just so wildly different in Generation 3 that it wasn't possible at the time, and the hardware might not have even been up to snuff to accommodate for such a thing. As a result of this, we've spent the last 20 years building on Ruby and Sapphire's framework after ditching the glitchy, messy code of the first two generations. It was a severe price to pay, but an understandable one. It's why we're at the point we're at now, and even why we got games like Fire Red, Leaf Green, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and so on. Remakes were specifically crafted to enable transferring of Pokemon from other regions to newer games for a collection. A foundation that, I will repeat, has been set almost 20 years ago and has not shifted in priority ever since. Even up to the recent 20th anniversary, Game Freak actually managed to incorporate transferring from the Virtual Console games to Sun and Moon using new technology and algorithms, allowing literally every Pokemon game to have some sort of connectivity with the most recent titles. Whilst one of my more recent videos was dedicated to why I think Game Freak deserves a lot more faith and a bigger chance when it comes to their newer games, I cannot and will not ever be able to understand this decision. And this is despite how much research and admiration I've personally invested in this little team that I just love so much. Though the problem really is just that, is that it's a decision. Unlike with the jump from the second to the third generation, it's clear that this time it was a calculated choice as opposed to a forced retooling of the game's mechanics. This is very clear because of how Masuda himself announced the information on Nintendo's E3 2019 Treehouse. He worded it as if he knew he was going to get a great deal of backlash, even stating that he announced it ahead of time to help us prepare for the news. The real question is why, and why would they decide to do this? Well, before we even get to dissecting Game Freak's answer that's been very clearly stated at this point, I do want to begin with responding to what the Pokemon community themselves have been saying to justify Game Freak's actions. One argument that I'm seeing pretty commonly is that Pokemon Let's Go compromised Pokemon Sword and Shield's development, and that's the reason why they won't have time to fit all of the Pokemon into the Galar Pokédex. Well, we know that this just isn't true because Pokemon has always had two teams developing Pokemon games side by side as far back as Pokemon Black and White. Let's Go had a lot of the newer members that originally grew up with the older games, but Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield have a lot of the older members that worked independently from the Let's Go team. If you want a better breakdown of that structure, you can go and watch my video on why Pokemon Z just didn't come to fruition, where I explore it quite a bit. Another one that I'm seeing is it's alright so long as they patch the Pokemon in later when they have more time. Well, I'd argue that selling us an incomplete game is kinda shitty even for Nintendo game standards, but to begin with, there's absolutely zero precedent of them doing anything like this, which has been even further reinforced since I began this video's script. When the Pokemon Bank service was eventually dropped, all of the Pokemon could immediately be transferred to X and Y. It's not like we had to wait a little bit after that. Another thing was when Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were well past their release date. Game Freak didn't even patch in smaller things such as the additional Mega Evolution content into X and Y. Despite them having enough reason to do so, considering the Hoenn remakes weren't exactly making a great deal of money by that point anymore. Probably the biggest argument that I'm seeing is that the game is going to have upwards of 800 models, and that's way too much for them to handle. Aside from the fact that this was never really a problem to begin with, Sword and Shield have had a lot more development time than most of the Pokemon games before it. Additionally, time crunch and overworking is not an issue because all of the existing models were created during X and Y's development. Most of the legwork was done into making super high quality base models that were future-proof. They were then downscaled onto the 3DS games, and it's why they look so off when put next to Pokemon Go or Pokemon Let's Go. It's clear that Pokemon largely have base models at ridiculously high quality that they scale accordingly for different games and slightly tweak the textures for. Stop spreading the notion that they're entirely new models each game. I know Game Freak might seem a little behind, but no company would waste that amount of time. I would entirely understand if Game Freak were taking visible steps to improve these models or give Pokemon new idle animations that they desperately need, but from what we've seen so far, this just isn't true. Pokemon behave in exactly the same ways that they do in the 3DS games and use the same models, so there's really, honestly, no excuse here. They intentionally covered their bases years in advance because of this very reason. And whilst I realize it's not exactly as easy as dragging and dropping these models from one folder to another, it is by no means as difficult as Game Freak nor these deniers are making it out to be. Or so I thought. Now, everything I just said was true. Pokemon need better idle animations, and the models aren't a great deal of work that they haven't done before, but upon further reinspection, I've come to realize that additional animation and work is the reason why this choice has been made. Though that being said, it's even more baffling and confusing than before and complicates the situation quite a bit. One of the main reasons why so many Pokemon were cut seems to be random encounter animations. Like you enter a battle and the Pokemon does an action or emotes. Let's use the Pokemon Wingull as an example to show you what I mean. In Pokemon Sun and Moon as well as Let's Go, there isn't an animation when you encounter a Pokemon. They just kinda idly flap about, sit there and so on. In Sword and Shield however, the Pokemon actually emote when you encounter them, which is nice. I actually checked my Pokédex in the Generation 7 games and noticed that this was amazingly similar to one of Wingull's existing attack animations in Sun and Moon, but it's been tweaked to have a lot more personality. This did lead me to believe that this choice was debatably justified. Adding and or tweaking encounter animations for every single Pokemon would have been a pretty crazy task, right? It's something that I observed with a Pokemon like Machoke too, just look at how it opens its mouth to roar, whereas in Sun and Moon it just kinda flexed awkwardly. It makes a big change, though it's a lot of work. Well, it was at that point that I thought about it and realized that if you can't encounter the Pokemon in the wild, then they just wouldn't have an animation, right? Like, say that I really want to import Dialga from Pokemon Bank to Sword and Shield. If he's not natively in the Galar region in the first place, why would he even need an encounter animation to begin with? Even ignoring the possibility of a patch, it doesn't seem needed considering we wouldn't be seeing all of these now locked out Pokemon in the wild in the first place. I then began to rationalize this with, oh well, they must have likewise updated entry animations for things like trainer battles with the Pokemon, right? Well, I checked the footage from the recently released E3 demos and no, they don't have them. I thought maybe that this had something to do with them being all new Pokemon like Corviknight and I wasn't able to tell their idols apart from these new animations. But surely enough, I checked the trailer from the last direct and even Sork, a Generation 5 Pokemon, just kinda sits there and does nothing, just like in the 3DS games. So basically, even in the event that you get into something like a Wi-Fi battle with a non-Galadex Pokemon, there is no difference, meaning no additional animation, meaning no reasoning for the cut if that newly tweaked animation is to blame. Interestingly, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee do have trainer battle entry animations, but not Sword and Shield. Like, I'm even comparing the E3 demos of both games to each other here for a fair comparison, and Sword and Shield are a little worse off in this regard. Anyway, I kinda thought my research ended there, but it was pointed out to me that the real culprit of this whole ordeal is actually just Dynamaxing. The person who told me? Well, it was Masuda himself, really. In an interview with Famitsu that was done after the script was originally written, Masuda explained that he is not happy with the decision and that he had absolutely zero choice. This leaves me almost feeling kind of betrayed, but before I even explain that, let me get into the details. Dynamaxing uses two separate models for each Pokemon in the game, not to mention the swirling clouds and vortex that comes with it. This is an incredible amount of work, and whilst I can respect it, I don't know how to feel about it. I am absolutely by no means a game developer, so I don't want to say this is certain, but maybe there's merit in already using the insanely high quality base models we know exist for the Dynamax Pokemon. Or better yet, not tying the swirling clouds and vortex to these new amped up Pokemon models at all. I do want to outline that if that's possible, then it would be much preferred to allow us to keep all of the Pokemon in the game as opposed to doing that, but I'm not going to say for certain and act like it's possible, so I'm just going to present an alternative. Why even have this trade-off at all? You've really got to ask yourself, is Dynamaxing worth compromising all of these locked Pokemon? And that's a question that I want to try to answer today. Though, as much as I like how Dynamaxing is a very unobtrusive new core mechanic, I struggle to answer that question. I surely hope the region does something pretty big with it in terms of story and the new raid battles, but when this game's online inevitably fades away in the future and newer games don't have Dynamaxing and has all of the new Pokemon because of the backlash a choice like this received, it really kind of makes you think that if this shit was worth it at all, especially in say 10 years down the line. Even then, that's putting a lot of faith in Game Freak to deliver. And even if they do, the now confirmed removal of Mega Evolutions and Z-moves really makes me question if this shit was actually worth it. For as much as people don't like Mega Evolutions and as polarizing as those concepts are, Dynamaxing isn't an alternative to them as Z-moves were to Mega Evolution before it. It's a replacement for both of those things, as well as many beloved Pokemon that we won't get to see, which is unquestionably an objective loss in content. Now, remember when Pokemon X and Y only had 72 new Pokemon to allow for new designs and Mega Evolutions with the remaining time? An understandable price to pay, but now all of that work is gone, and somehow Sword and Shield is now making me view even X and Y, a completely separate game, way more negatively because Mega Evolution are going to have objectively less of an impact than ever before. I think my biggest issue is that Game Freak's other reasoning is really flawed. I said before that I felt kinda betrayed, and this is reflected in the flip-flopping between Game Freak's statements just days apart. During the Treehouse livestream and probably some other places, they stated that removing Pokemon was also done in part because of balancing purposes. Now, balancing in Pokemon is such a non-issue for the 90% of players that don't even care about competitive battling in a series designed not to have multiplayer battles since the start. Like, Red and Blue had link battles requested to be put in the games at the last minute. The core gameplay wasn't even designed with PvP in mind. So now what are we doing? Are we forcing balance at the cost of the wider fanbase who don't really care? To add to this, Masuda said that this was a choice he didn't want to make when just a day before that they were saying that it was done in best interests to better rebalance the game. That being said, I cannot agree with them doing this as a result of battle balance based off of past experience alone. Anything goes in terms of fan-made competitive rule sets and tiers from communities such as Smogon, and I don't expect Game Freak to balance around those. But for their official VGC format, balance automatically goes out of the window when you introduce new forms and Pokemon constantly, such as the Primals and Auras, that dominate the metagame because you wanted to sloppily show off a new mechanic and wreck that balance in the process of doing so. You don't get to play the balancing card in this situation. You lost the privilege to do so after continuously adding hastily rushed, metagame breaking Pokemon like Mega Kangaskhan and Mega Rayquaza. There's also no option for something like a widespread retooling of the balance either, because unlike with Ruby and Sapphire's original cutoff points, some Pokemon can be transferred but not others, meaning that they're not going to fundamentally overhaul the stats of every Pokemon or something like that. I don't agree with the limited development time argument because, as I've said, including existing models for all of the Pokemon has been done years ago. Nobody expected every Pokemon to be catchable in Sword and Shield because they never have been. But in the era of 3D models and animations, what's already existing can be used in the newer games by transferring a lot better than sprites could. Even if Dynamaxing was something that was completely unavoidable and needed to be put in the game, why not give it the Mega Pokemon treatment? Why not make the selection of Generation 8 Pokemon far more appealing to contend with things like Mega Evolution by making Dynamaxing exclusive to Pokemon newly introduced in Sword and Shield? Finally, I also just do not agree with how they're going to decide the best selection of Pokemon. Going back to my Dialga transfer example from earlier, I can assure you that zero people complained about or took issue with the contextual implications of being able to transfer a Pokemon like that into the newer games. I simply don't trust Game Freak to decide that best selection to suit the Galar region, because even though each region had its own Pokemon that it could catch, there was absolutely nothing stopping anyone from dropping older Pokemon in there because it was never a contextual issue before. Not even when more culturally diverse regions such as Unova, Kalos, and Alola were introduced as a contrast to the Japanese-inspired regions was transferring ever seen as an issue. Furthermore, Mew, a Kanto mythical Pokemon that has 0 bases existing in Galar in the first place, has been confirmed to be in the game if you buy a brand new Pokeball Plus, which just shatters any illusion of context that you guys say you want to uphold in the first place, so I sucked into buying another toy. A Pokemon like Mew has lore and backstory impossibly rooted in another region entirely, so this reasoning all but goes out the window. This is a mess, plain and simple. Pokemon stopped being about the gotta catch 'em all stuff a long time ago in the West and was never really a thing in Japan at all, but we've gotta make our voices heard here, because it really devalues all of the effort put in place to keep us having a large collection that we've become attached to. Through entire remakes, the PAL Park, Poketransfer and Pokemon Bank, Virtual Console ports, spin-off games that allowed us to get Pokemon not natively included in that generation's main games, out-of-region special swarm events, GBA to DS lock-on technology through Wild Encounters, and an entire main series game that came out last year that incentivized catching all of the Pokemon in that game through its design philosophy and mechanics. Pokemon has tried so hard to uphold this collective design throughout the years, and I'm hoping Game Freak drastically reconsiders their approach for Sword and Shield. Do not go and harass Masuda or Mori or anyone else about this kind of thing on Twitter, because we are better than that. But also don't be compliant with this treatment and try and make efforts to make your voices be heard positively. It's what I set out to do with this video after all. As much as I honestly feel like give Game Freak the benefit of the doubt, this is one of those times where I can't sit still and let them lock out much of what I've built up throughout many years of attachments to worlds and experiences that I want to bring forward, and I know many of you are the same. I love Game Freak and adore Pokemon a whole lot, but I'm also a consumer with reasonable expectations. You've done it before, and you can do it again. Thanks for watching. I realize that this video may come off as, again, a little bit more sensationalist or angrier than I usually am, so feel free to check out my last video talking about things like Pokemon Sleep. I am unusually excited about it considering how well the Pokemon series in Game Freak has done passive gameplay in the past. My schedule has been all over the place because of E3, and I'm also moving this week, so I'll be sure to see you guys at some point, but no promises on what that video is actually gonna be about.